previous marriage are now reliving their years with the Elvis Presley clan. Dee and the Stanley brothers knew the real Elvis, who few other people saw during his lifetime, and they vividly and intimately described their day-to-day life with him. On this, the 40th birthday of Elvis Presley, we'll meet Dee Presley and Rick and David Stanley, all of whom knew Elvis on a very personal and intimate level.
Elvis Presley here.
Dee Presley. How did you come to know the Presley family? You were in Germany at the time that you met the Presley
Yes,
family.
that's right. I had been in Orleans, France with my husband, and we were transferred to Bad Nauheim. And right away after Elvis's mother died, in September of '58, they came to Germany. Elvis was transferred to Germany. And of course his grandmother and father came along with him. And of course I liked Elvis from the very beginning. When I saw him back in Virginia at the Warwick Theater, I thought...
As a customer and a fan at the time.
Yes, as a fan. I guess I was one of his biggest fans. Of course, I wasn't the screaming fans, you know, jumping up and down. But I saw something in Elvis that night on stage, and I felt like that Elvis was really going to really make it. And so back to the story. Just had to bring that up to date a little bit. But I called Elvis and invited him to come to dinner. Of course, at the time
Now let me get this. You're in Germany.
Right.
You've never met Elvis Presley. You've seen him at a theater in Virginia.
Right.
And you say, well, I guess I'll call up Elv and see if he wants to go and have a little din-din tonight.
That's right.
Married lady?
Well, I had no romantic intentions of Elvis Presley. You know, just Elvis, you've lost your mother, and you've got your grandmother, and you've got your father with you. So why don't you come over and have dinner with my family and I? And of course, Vernon answered the phone. I said, "This is Mrs. Dee Stanley speaking. May I speak to Elvis?" He said, "Sure, Mrs. Stanley." And Elvis was right at the phone. Now, years later, I look back and think how it really happened. How did that happen? Because you might as well have tried to get to Fort Knox, into Fort Knox later on. Elvis did not talk on the phone to anybody. So I said, "Elvis, I'd like to have you and your family to come over. I'm sorry about your mother's passing." And he said, "Well, Mrs. Stanley, why don't you call me on Monday? I'm getting ready to go out on maneuvers." Well, Monday came. I did not call Elvis. And I joined Mrs. Presley. Mother Presley, I call her after her and I was married, and even now. I joined them for coffee at the Grunwald Hotel. They were staying there at the time. So that's the story of the meeting of Vernon.
That's almost incredible. You know, as you say, the chances of getting through to a man of his popularity and reputation at the time seem almost impossible. And the fact that you were simply able to track him down at that hotel, I can't imagine how you knew he was staying at that hotel.
Well, my husband was his first sergeant at that time.
Oh, well, that would help, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And the wife of the first sergeant calling would kind of help, wouldn't it?
Yes, you know, rank does count.
But now, you promised me there was no romantic attraction at this time, nothing like that.
None.
You just, out of motherliness for Elvis Presley,
well, I didn't really feel too motherly for him. I thought he was quite charming and quite handsome. But I really felt like that he was a Southern boy. Okay, I'm from the South, so that does make a difference, you know. And I thought, well, perhaps, you know, they would just like to come over to have dinner. Actually, perhaps I wasn't really thinking at all. Sometimes it doesn't pay to think. Just pick up the phone and call.
Yeah, do what comes naturally.
Do whatever you want to do. And then if it happens, well and good. So he was there at home.
Now you go over for coffee, and Elvis is in the room.
No, not Elvis. He's in the field. But I have coffee with Vernon Presley and his mother. So when I arrive at the hotel with my friend, I had someone to come along with me. They rang the room that I had arrived. And I was looking out the window, and Mr. Presley entered the room. And I turned to look, and I said, "Hello, Mr." I couldn't believe that I saw such a handsome man as Vernon Presley. My mouth was, I was just aghast, you know. I didn't think that his father would look like that. So we had coffee. He said, "How are you, Mrs. Stanley?" And I noticed we kept glancing across the table at each other. And I thought, well, this is terrible, Dee. You're a married woman. You shouldn't be so handsome. Of course, I didn't have a perfect marriage. I was getting ready to...
Those are hard to find, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And of course, no one breaks up a perfect marriage.
No.
So I was getting ready to fly back to the States, and Bill and I had discussed divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Mr. Presley, when I walked in my car, he walked me to the car. And when he opened the door, he said, "I will see you again." Well, we drove home. I went into the house and I sat down and I was thinking, Dee, what's wrong? This can't be possible. You finding him so attractive. So, the three of us, my husband and I, Bill Stanley, and Vernon started having dinner together, and real pals, a real threesome.
Hey, Vernon, meet Bill. Bill, this is Vernon.
Yes, real buddies.
Yeah.
So, Bill would call Vernon to spend some time with me. Dee needs to go shopping, and I don't have the time. Or she would like to go to the theater, to the movie. And so pretty soon it happened. It was more than just a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And it was bound to happen that way. It was destined, I think, to happen.
Did you want it to happen that way?
Oh, yes. After sometimes I wanted it very much to happen that way. I felt very guilty because I was married.
Do you think when your former husband, First Sergeant Bill, would know that you were out shopping with Vernon, that he might have thought in his heart of hearts, it's almost over, I can see it happening before my eyes?
Yeah. Well, not really. We trusted each other, and Bill and I, we had promised each other, if anyone ever came into our life, if I should fall in love, I would tell him. Mm-hmm. No one else would ever tell him anything about me, or vice versa, We had that trust, mm-hmm. and we knew it could happen, because the marriage was shaky. But when I had returned to Virginia, see, I flew home to make a decision, okay? Pretty soon it got very, very uncomfortable, seeing Vernon, and then still married to Bill, And I did, as I said, feel very guilty, because I was brought up very strict.
Of course.
Very strict faith. And I returned to Virginia. And when I got on the plane, I really did not know what was going to happen. I had to get away from the two men to see what was going to happen. And of course, Vernon Presley called just about every day and returned to the States. Mm-hmm. Well, during the time that I had left, and we have Bill and Vernon together back in Germany discussing me, wondering what I was doing,
Yeah, I wonder who's kissing her now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, no. Thanks. Thank you. But no, it seems though, Bill approached Vernon one day and he said, Vernon, I've heard some rumors about you and Dee riding around in the sports car, and are you in love with Dee? And of course, Vernon was sitting there and he couldn't answer that question. You can imagine how he must have felt.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Really, that is a tough one, How can you tell a man that you're in love with his wife,
mm-hmm.
And I felt the same way. I didn't want to tell Bill that I was in love, but Bill was beginning to suspect. But he said, Vernon, when Dee tells me herself, I'll know. But until that day, I have faith and confidence in Dee. And, that's a wonderful thing, to trust someone. Excuse me.
That's all right. Now, I just want to jump ahead here a little bit, because as we all know, it came to pass that
yes.
You and your former husband were divorced, and you married Vernon Presley, became
right.
Elvis's stepmother.
Right.
How did that go with Elvis? Did he accept you as his new mom, as a member of the family, as the woman his father loved?
As the member of the family, the official hostess of Graceland, but not as his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I never expected that. When we planned our marriage, we spoke to Elvis about it. I thought that Elvis should know our plans. I would have done the same if my three sons would have been older to got their approval. So Elvis was very happy, but I think Elvis thought that he had not only lost a mother, that he was going to lose his father. Father's got a new family now and a new bride, and where am I going to fit into the picture? He wondered if we would have room for him, That was almost like leaving him out. But we grew to love each other. See, I didn't rush right in and say, oh, Elvis, I want you to love me, and push myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the pushy
Give me a
type.
chance, and I want to be in your life, and that sort of thing,
yes. I won the respect. And I wasn't there all the time. I went there on invitation after I moved out, I stayed there for about a year. But I wanted to move out because everything was inside the gates of Graceland, you know, maids, and the boys were taken to school, and it was not quite normal. You know, they were getting up to the one to play football and be out on the lawn and do some of the things, you know. Children sometimes don't like to come by the security guards. They're little playmates, you know. So I did feel like that I wanted my own home. But when we bought the home, I saw how sad that Elvis looked when we purchased the house. And I could see that he was going to be very lonely, and he was. He wasn't happy about us leaving, in spite of the things that might have been said about Elvis and I. Elvis and I had a very good relationship. We had respect, and then later on, there's things that I learned and found out that I did not approve of. When my sons went on the road, I was very grieved. When they got older.
I want to get your sons into the picture here, so we'll take a little commercial break here, and we'll bring out Rick and David Stanley. They'll join their mother, Dee Stanley, or Dee Presley.
Presley. Now, how was that doing that stuff?
Here is a famous guy, and all of a sudden he's in the family.
Well, it was an unusual lifestyle, sir. Being around this man, we didn't have any idea. I was 5 years old who Elvis Presley was. Being driven to school in his pink Cadillac sure got a lot of attention, and kids were walking up to us saying, "Rick, what's Elvis really like?" and going on. I didn't know who the man really was, sir, until 1969 when I saw him on stage, and I saw him put on his first live appearance in 10 years. That's when I realized the impact that this man had upon young people and older people also.
When did you know who he was? Right off?
I would think it was 1969 also.
Also, you were both little kids then. You really
yeah, we were 14 back then. I was 14, and we saw Elvis in Las Vegas at the Hilton, or the International at the time. And we really recognized, you know, we saw the impact that he had with, you know, the public.
Was it a wow?
It was a flash, yeah. It was like, this is incredible, you know. It was a rush, for sure.
How was he to you? You know, he really, if he didn't choose to, he really didn't have to be nice to you if he didn't choose to.
No, sir. The first day that we met Elvis, we sat and talked with him for a moment. The next day we went outside. There was 3 of every toy imaginable. Ponies, scooters, bicycles, swing sets, everything. There was nothing like getting brand new Cadillacs for your birthday and things like that. It was, it was a tremendous lifestyle, and Elvis was more than a brother to us. He was more like a father and a best friend, and we really didn't realize the impact and who he really was until we started seeing the people react to him, and when we started traveling with him when I was in 1970. When I started seeing all the people, how they'd act around him. He was a fantastic brother to us.
Dee, we've all read the stories about his generosity to people where he would buy them cars or very expensive presents, people who had nothing or people who simply bumped into him on the street and were nice to him. Would it be fair to say that he was very generous with his money and with giving of material things, but maybe not so generous with his emotions?
Right.
With his privacy?
That could be right.
I don't know if that's right or not.
Well, as a child, you know, Vernon has often told me that Elvis felt like he had to buy and give kids gifts, even to play with him, you know. And maybe when he grew up, he still wanted to keep people. I can understand that. He was a very lonely child, being the only child, and sometimes that did really aggravate Vernon. He said, "Elvis, you really don't have to buy people." But, you know, I mean, bless his heart, who knows? That's right. He would give a gift. He was very generous, but you're right as far as generous, and I mean with his emotions, and a lot of times he was a very self-centered person also, you know, which I can't say too much about that. A lot of people are, and like their privacy. But
what about all of these purported investigations that appear on television or in the press about how Elvis Presley really died, about how heavily he was into drugs and sex? How do you react to those things?
Well, Elvis definitely had a problem with drugs. The last 2 years, a year and a half, he really got bad. It started with medication given to him by doctors to like go to sleep and wake up for the tours. And it finally just caught up with him. It got to a point to where he got dependent, and, you know, his resistance.
So then we're not talking about cocaine or marijuana.
Not street drugs at all.
That kind of thing.
Prescribed medication, everything was given to him by a physician at all times. Elvis, sir, I used to really be into drugs and things like that myself, and was really into the Class A narcotics and marijuana and coke and heroin and things like that. Elvis would really get uptight about it. He would, if he got wind of it, he would really jump on my back about it. And Elvis could justify because it was prescribed medication, whereas he couldn't see me doing all the street drugs that I did. So Elvis really, he loved his country, he loved young people. He was really a clean-cut guy all the way down the line. And he just couldn't understand why we would want to get into the street drugs and things like that.
Yet for him it was fine because they were prescribed.
Right.
Now there is one doctor whose actions are open to some question at this point as to whether or not these prescriptions were all really necessary to the well-being of Elvis Presley, the performer who maintained a frenetic schedule. What do you think about that? The doctor and the necessity of the prescriptions.
Well, at this point, sir, I really kind of feel sorry for Dr. Nicopoulos.
All right.
Because I really think the man really loved Elvis. I think his intentions were good, but I think he got just a little bit too carried away. You know, he was writing out prescriptions for just anything. Whenever Elvis wanted it, he would write it out instead of when he needed it. He was giving him anything that he wanted. I really feel sorry for the guy, but the guy's supposed to be a physician. He takes an oath before the Healing Arts Board, and he writes out a prescription for, well, you know, in 6 months, it's obtained something like 20,000 pills. And that's ridiculous. No human being. Elvis was lucky he was stayed alive as long as he did, sir, as the way the medication was given to him.
Mm-hmm. In the book, there's a chapter called TCBing, or TCB. In fact, you have it around your tie. You have a little chain there with TCB on. What is TCB? What's taking care of business?
Taking care of business. With the lightning boat, the TCB is taking care of business lightning fast. Elvis picked that up in, what, 71, 70? And it was just kind of a motto thing he picked up. He liked for everybody to do everything quick. When he said something, he wanted it done, no questions asked, let's do it. And he went on to put it on the tail of his airplane, TCB, everything. And TLC for the ladies, which was tender loving care, to take care of the TCBers.
What did you do for him when you were on the road? What was your job?
I was a personal bodyguard, security. I started off personal aid for the first 2 years. In the last 4 years, I was into security, setting up hotel security, advanced security, packing my ride and taking care of Elvis.
Did you ever have to, like, get him out of the concert before the fans could get to him, hair-raising situations, running down alleyways, anything like that?
The way Elvis left the stage, it was like a battle plan. I mean, when Elvis sang that last song, everybody was in place. And when the guy got up there and said, Elvis has left the building, he was gone just like that, as soon as off the stage, in the car, and out. You know, we organized that. It was a challenge to set up a security for Elvis because, you know, to get him in and out of places, we had to scheme a little bit.
What would have happened to him if you hadn't had that kind of security?
He couldn't have worked. It would have been totally impossible.
That's right.
When you were on the road, what did you do?
Well, I started out as a personal aide first, sir, when I was about 16 years old, just out of high school. And I started doing public relations work. I started setting up hotel accommodations, flights, things like that. Then he bought 3 of his own jets, so that knocked that out. I started training to be his road manager and was looking forward to the opportunity of working with a friend of mine, Joe Esposito, who was Elvis's road manager. He was working with me, trying to polish me up as a young conservative businessman, which at the time I wasn't. But my job was sometimes, sir, I woke him up every morning, gave him coffee and orange juice, screened all of his phone calls. Many times I put the ice water and Gatorade beside his bed at night and tucked him in. So I was with him, you know, I woke him up, I put him in bed at night. I was with him all the time.
You said before with your sons joined us that you were grieved by some of the things that happened on the road. Could you tell me what those were?
Well, yes, in the later years, you know, when Rick left, I was very upset because Rick was too young, I felt like, and Dave got into it, I guess, earlier than, I think Dave stepped in about 17. Well, you know, you had the older brother, so you had more privileges, seemed like, a little earlier than the other two. But he took all of them. But Ricky was the first one to go. And, of course, you know, Ricky had to get his diploma, high school, you know, and there was just no question. You know, I talked to Elvis. Elvis said, well, Dee, I will have a tutor for Rick. And he came over to see me, you know, because I had always kept the boys home. They had played with Elvis. We had wonderful times together. We were a very close family. But to let Rick go was terrible. I just could not see.
Baby.
And I was afraid what would happen to Rick. So I said, Elvis, please don't do this. Oh, Dee, I will have a tutor for Rick. There will be a tutor that travels with us. The limousine will take Ricky to church every Sunday morning. You know, all these things that a mother naturally, you know, I'm looking out for Rick's future. and I was a little frightened of what could happen to him. Well, they all went on the road then. And I didn't resent the way they felt about Elvis. I resented that Elvis stepped in to my private life.
Did he want you, did he actively seek you out, Rick, and say, I want you to come to work for me, I want you to be with me on the road?
Yes, sir. He came to me when I was 16 years old and said, Rick, because of your personality and how you work with people, I think it would be fantastic if you come to work with me. I'll put you through school, which, you know, to me, sir, that's the only regret I have is I didn't get to go to college, which I'm thinking about doing now. I got a tremendous education from being on the road with Elvis Presley.
Oh, absolutely.
I was able to learn how to work with people, things like that. I'm an evangelist now, and I still can work with young people and tell them the problems with drugs and things. I was a heroin addict for almost 5 years, alcoholic, the whole thing when I was a teenager. I was hanging around men when I was 16 years old who were 30. And I was living like them. So I had the lifestyle of Elvis Presley at the age of 16, being able to do anything that I wanted to. The only regret I had was I wasn't a Christian then, so maybe Elvis might be alive now if I could have worked with him.
Yet some people have said that he became more Christian in the final days of his life than he had been through the years of his life up until almost his last 4 or 5 months. Who was a minister that I chatted with? Rex Humbard?
Rex Humbard.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that Elvis became more aware of Christ the latter part of his life, and he did meet with Rex Humbard and sit and pray and talk for quite some time. I believe that Elvis was a believer, but the devil believes. You know, almost everybody believes. Believing is just not good enough. You've got to take the step of faith. After my brother's death, sir, I stood over his casket and I realized, Rick, Elvis is only 42 years old. You're heading down the road just like him. I went through 2 drug rehabilitation hospitals for 30 days at a time. I couldn't get my life straightened out. I went to Florida. I accepted Christ as my Savior. My life has been totally, completely turned around. And there's some good things that have come out of this man's death. A lot of young people, I do some work like Carol Burnett does, you know. I go in colleges, high schools, give drug talks, turn away from that stuff.
Yeah. When was the last time you saw Elvis Presley?
It was, in my case, 2 days before he died. We had a shift of people. There was me and Ricky and 2 other guys. Elvis had to have somebody with him 24 hours a day, right across the hall. He was in a situation to where you had to literally watch him because, you know, anything could happen to him. On his medication, he could fall down and bust his head. He could fall asleep eating a sandwich. And I was, a couple of days before he died, I was there. And he even said goodbye then. I mean, I feel like that the last conversation, he looked at me and he said, David, I don't feel like that I'll see you again on earth. And, you know, I just, talking about a rush.
What a bummer, huh?
Yeah, and I just, was such a negatory thought, you know. I kind of walked out. And then 2 days later, I walk around the corner and see him laying, you know, he was dead. He had died. And I just, wow, the whole end was horrible. You know, not just the death, but before the death. It was almost like a release to see him gone, like he was so miserable at one time. And, you know, wanting to know the Lord, literally know God. And to see him there, you just said, well, now he's at peace.
The full story of 3 people who knew Elvis Presley very, very well, members of his family, Dee Presley and her sons, Rick and David. And it's all told in the book, Elvis Presley, We Love You Tenderly. Thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate your making the trip.
Thank
and
you,
it was good to
Tom.
meet all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching in the past.